Today, we're getting under the hood of women's health with Jenny. Jenny underwent the process of freezing her eggs in June of 2010, and at the time was one of the very first women in this country to freeze eggs using current technology of vitrification. Fast forward 10 years, Jenny became pregnant in June of 2020 using those frozen eggs and gave birth to a beautiful baby girl in February of 2021. Jenny will get under the hood of egg freezing.
When I was in my early 30s, I was working a lot. I had multiple restaurants in Colorado, and I was working 60, 70, 80-hour weeks. It was just after the financial collapse of 2008. So as a small business owner, things were really, really challenging. And I just found myself constantly reminding myself, I should say, that I was turning 35. I was getting close to turning 35. And that's that number. That's that evil number that a lot of women fear because we're told that's the point at which our fertility really starts declining. And so for me, I just wanted to give myself a little relief. I wanted to stop thinking about it so much. And egg freezing seemed like the most viable way to do that. Leading up to the decision was actually really tricky because as so it was new. The science was new. I did not know anyone who had done it. So I didn't really have that to draw upon. So I was going into it somewhat blindfolded. And originally I had started talking to the clinic in fall of 2009. And we were all set to move forward. And then various things occurred, like a gigantic snowstorm that precluded me from being able to drive over to Denver because I was living on the other side of the mountains from Denver. And so I had to cancel the trip. And in my mind, I was thinking, this is the universe telling me I shouldn't be doing this. I'm going to cancel. And so I did. That then, fast forward, we went through that whole winter of 2009 into 10, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I had my family really supporting me, and I had a lot of people supporting me. And ultimately, I came back around and I was like, all right, I really do think it was my 35th birthday. It was, May of 2010. I was turning 35, and I decided that this was truly my gift to myself. And I was going to go through the process, which I did in June of 2010. Well, if I were doing it today, it would be very different than when I was doing it in 2010, because today there are, fertility clinics on every block. I'm being a bit facetious, but I think it is hard. You do need to do your research, and it's very important to do your research because there are plenty of fertility clinics out there that want to prey on female fertility or female vulnerability, and they'll just take your money. But at the time, Dr. Schoolcraft, who started CCRM, which is the Colorado Center for Reproductive Medicine, they are one of the biggest fertility clinics in the country. They now have offices all over the country, but the office outside of Denver is their flagship, and was their original office. I had several friends that were seeing Dr. Schoolcraft for their fertility issues and going through IVF. So he was just the obvious choice to go to. I had no idea who he really was or who he has become. He's written books and he's been on Oprah, and he's really very famous in the fertility world. People fly to him from all over the world. But he just was my friend's doctor, and he ended up being my doctor. So I really lucked out because he's actually pretty hard to get into these days. But yeah, so I didn't really have to make too much of a choice. But the message is definitely do your research. There are a lot of factors to consider. One is, most fertility clinics will actually have you come in to do a basic workup to just see where your fertility stands. And so they do that by checking your hormones and various other factors. And the reason that's really important to mention is because if you already have fertility issues, of which you're most likely unaware of, right? Because you haven't actually started the process of trying to get pregnant. But if your numbers are quite low to begin with, you may not be a good candidate for egg freezing. And what that means is a responsible fertility doctor is going to tell you that and not just take your money and freeze your eggs when really you might need help in other ways before considering that egg freezing process. So that is really something very important. And I'm pretty certain that most clinics are going to do that workup before going through the process. The second thing to consider is, whether you want to be, what age you're doing it at. And, you are putting hormones in your body. It's not nothing. So that is something to consider. And I do think that not rushing into it because you're panicked about your age is important, and to really think about it and make do some due diligence and really think about it. Because then probably the biggest factor is the financial side of it. It is expensive. And now that said, there are way more opportunities to handle that now than there were when I did it 14 years ago. For example, most clinics offer financing. A lot of insurance companies do cover it now. A lot of companies offer it as a benefit. The Googles, the Apples, the Facebooks, those big companies that are there, are very kind of progressive, offer it as a benefit. So do your research there too. Maybe it's worth finding a job at one of these companies that offers it as a benefit. But yeah, it's expensive, and that is really not to be taken lightly, the expense of it. So the journey for me was interesting because in the time since I've frozen my eggs, I've followed a lot of other women's experiences. I read blogs and articles. At the time that I froze my eggs in 2009, if you Googled it, you couldn't find a single thing on the internet. And now it's like, it seems like everyone's freezing their eggs. And so you can find a lot of experience online. And for some women, it's not an easy process. The hormones are challenging for some women. It makes them not feel good. I'll just speak from my own experience. I didn't have too much trouble with the hormones. Of course, the hormones make you bloated and your jeans are going to be a little tight, but that to me is a side effect that I was willing to take. And so again, not every woman is going to have the same experience, but for me, I found the process emotionally very exciting. I felt I was excited that I was taking my fertility. I was getting control of my fertility and my timeline. I felt empowered. I was excited. And so that made all of the things that aren't so awesome, like having to give yourself the shots, it kind of didn't matter because I was so excited about the process. And it made me feel like I am doing something to potentially enable me to have a biological child. The process is it's not short, but it's not terribly long either. Typically, you're going to go in, as I mentioned before, they're going to do a basic workup. And then they will create a timeline based on your specific cycle. And generally, I have seen that be about a 3-month lead. So what they want to do is they really want to get your cycle on a very specific pattern, especially if you don't have a really, really a cycle that's very, very routine. And then they're going to start you typically on some birth control, again, to manage the cycle. And then you're going to start taking some shots, and they give you a very, very specific calendar, and you're assigned a nurse that is going to be holding your hand the whole time. You can call them and be in touch with them the whole time. They're really going to help you. Your nurse is going to be your best friend through the process. And they're going to give you a very specific calendar of what you're going to be doing every single day. And the process gets more, I don't want to say intense, but there are more things to do as you get closer and closer to the day of your retrieval. Now, what I like to tell women is it's going to be different for every single woman. So you go in and they're measuring your hormones, and they may increase the hormones you're giving yourself or decrease the hormones you're giving yourself based on what's happening in your body. And each day they're also measuring your follicles, which is where your eggs are inside your ovaries. And you're looking up at a screen and they're measuring them, and they're growing on both sides, hopefully. And so based on what they're seeing, they're going to sort of change the protocol of the medications they're giving you each day leading up to the retrieval day. And then one day they're going to say, all right, your retrieval is going to be in 36 hours. And you give yourself a trigger shot, which is basically one last big shot that's going to lead up to the literally down to the hour that they have you scheduled to do the retrieval. You go in, they give you some, anesthesia. It's fairly basic. It is surgery though, because they go in with a needle, they pull the eggs out. And then what's really interesting is that an embryologist is standing by. They pull the eggs out, they take those eggs, they go under a microscope. The embryologist is going to look at the viability of those eggs. So in my case, they pulled 19 eggs out, 16 were viable to freeze. I was told that they're looking optimally to get between 10 and 20. So the 16 sort of fell smack in the middle. So I was very happy with that. And then and they're frozen within seconds. So by the time I woke up from my anesthesia, they told me I got 16 eggs and they're already frozen, sitting in a freezer. There's a few things that I really like to share with women, which is we all think that we are going to, or that our lives are going to happen sort of as we imagined and as we planned in our head. And it often doesn't. In fact, more often than not, it doesn't happen as we plan. And if you had told me when I was 25 that I wouldn't meet my husband until I was 42, I would have laughed in your face. I honestly never in a million years thought I wouldn't meet my partner until I was 42, but that was the case. So the advice that I really like to give women is to understand, to ask yourself, what is of most importance? I wanted to have children. I knew I wanted to have children, but for me, finding that partner was the most important. Could I have used my frozen eggs with a sperm donor and had kids at a younger age? Absolutely. But, I watched my sister have 3 kids very closely. I was intimately involved in that process. I know how hard it is. And so I wanted to do it with a partner. That was my main goal. So finding the partner was very important. Going out into the dating world, knowing I had these frozen eggs was very alleviating for my nervous system and my anxiety. It was helpful knowing that if I met my partner, I didn't have to try to have a baby the next day. I mean, I had these eggs. I could calm down a little bit. I could make good choices. I wasn't going to rush into any relationship just because of the pressure of my biological clock. And that was very important for my process. And I encourage women to think about that, because I see a lot of women that kind of rush into relationships because of their age. And they might be, good enough, a good enough relationship, but maybe not quite right. So that's one bit of advice that I like to share with women. And I also think it's really important for women to understand that when it comes to issues in pregnancy, now I want to be really careful and say this is not 100% across the board, but I would say in general, the majority of issues that women have with their fertility and or getting pregnant, miscarriages, issues like that, is an issue with the age of the egg, not the age of the woman's body. So, for example, I froze my eggs at 35. My embryo created with those eggs went into my body at the age of 45. So because I am a healthy person, that's important to notate, because the health of a woman's body has a huge impact on pregnancy and the success of the pregnancy. If you are working with a healthy body, putting in a 35-year-old egg, you're working more with the statistics of a 35-year-old egg, even though it's going into a 45-year-old body. So I just think that there are a lot of women that I talk to, even women that have frozen their eggs, that get to 40. I spoke with a woman recently who said, I just turned 40. I've been paying to store my eggs, and I think I'm going to get rid of them because I think I'm too old at this point. But then I just heard your story, and I'm going to keep my frozen eggs. And that to me is like worth me sharing my story, because I'm like, you froze your eggs at 35. You're going to get rid of them just because you haven't met your person by the age of 40? No, 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 no. Don't do that. Please don't do that. So that's a big message that I really like to share.